Oh my God, it worked.
Okay. So
We're
we
live.
gotta wait for something to get on, so maybe we know.
We started?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Is that going to be a problem? We can't.
Oh, that's coming from the left side? Yeah, just. But that's actually good. Fantastic. A second.
We know we hear it. Someone's hearing it.
Yeah. Somebody's in the room, so let us know if they us. You want to use the back to the tab, the left.
Comment tab or something?
Yeah, so we have
Something.
your other browser tab. And then it should be able to see comments. Scroll down.
No, we don't have comments.
Oh, there are no. Bummer. I don't get to get.
I'm going to sit over there and start asking all my questions. So, hi everybody, welcome to Costa Rica, where we're going to start.
Are you guys able to watch on YouTube? Make sure.
Mine is coming through.
Okay.
We good?
I think we're good.
Lean back a bit, right? So you're going to be the disembodied voice.
Yes, and disembodied voice. So, I think everybody knows what the description is. Basically, all of these questions were submitted by the public and other trainers.
Okay.
And we're just going to dive right in because I want to get plenty of time to talk through all of them. So we're just going to jump in. You guys ready?
Right.
Let's go. Kelly Dunbar, Michael Shikashio, ethics and welfare and modern country. Question number 1. As someone who deeply values science, systems that fuel real, measurable behavior change, I evolved in the doctrine field with belief that we not refer to something bigger, something more standardized, more evidence-backed, and ultimately more ethical. But what I found instead was a field heavily influenced by opinion, personality, and division, where ethics often felt like a moving target, basically aligned with, and science was cherry-picked to support already held beliefs. I had built all the steps necessary to create data collection systems rooted in learning theory and behavior principles, but my efforts were dismissed and left the field wondering, how do we as professionals create space for true scientific structure and doctrine without it becoming politicized or weaponized by ideology? And what role should measurable outcomes, data, and long-term welfare tracking actually play in how we define ethical training? It's a big.
Just start with a light question.
And we can refer back to the question too.
There's a last part to that.
Yeah,
Which is about welfare tracking or data tracking.
yes.
There's so much.
How do we as professionals create space for true scientific structure and doctrine without it becoming politicized or weaponized by ideology? And what role should measurable outcomes, data, and long-term welfare tracking actually play in how we define ethical training?
There's so much. And there's the whole hour.
Yeah.
Whatever. So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think it's super important to separate science from ethics. Yes, they intertwine at some point, but when you define them, I think you have to talk about the science is objective, right? Ideally, science is objective, and there's an ethical application that you can apply to that. Of course, training should be measurable, as far as your outcomes go, and you need data collecting. I don't think there's enough of that in the industry. I don't think people are trained enough in how to quantify their training. And actually, is this working? But is it working? Oh, dear, something's happening. Your battery's going to be low. Okay. We need to close that, and then.
Does anybody have another one of these?
Amanda,
No,
there's,
your battery on the computer.
Amanda, there's no plug though.
Power pack?
Oh, you don't have enough power. Oh. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Oh,
Is there
look
no
at
plug
that.
around?
You guys keep talking.
Okay.
You also just move it.
I have a computer, Mac plug-in. If you need
I
it.
think it's a piece.
Oh, no, it's a
It's
PC.
probably USB-C.
But I can just next to that, I can plug it in.
Oh, yeah.
Right, sorry, so,
Oh, okay.
so,
So much for our
Sorry.
beautiful background.
so much for that.
So much for our beautiful background. You're gonna have to turn.
Oh, we're turning.
Yeah.
That's still nice.
Do you want to help me, Amanda?
I got it.
Pardon me, everybody, I guess I can just keep talking.
How does it work?
Just need to pick up these.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so unfortunately we have a little window, but people can see the beautiful island out there. That works.
Facing you guys.
Yeah, you're facing the audience. All the online people are.
All right. We asked that last time, the question.
Why don't we just start over?
Yeah, it's just, well, watching.
That's all right.
How is that? Is that
Sorry,
good?
everybody.
Oh,
Is this a paper?
that looks
So
good.
it's good in the middle, when you're not in the light. Right.
Yeah.
The light
It's
is-
just in the back lane.
I'll start.
All right, sorry.
You know, what I've learned from this experience is
What do you need?
hard to test.
Yeah.
I use your life because when you do it, it's life, so.
Well, it's giving people time to join, so.
Yeah,
That's
So,
true.
and then you can always, when you redo it, you'll edit out the beginning. Like when you download it.
All right.
or not.
Take two.
The one
I
thing
did.
that I'm a little sad about is that the window in the youth live just looks like a big square of light. But in reality, there's a beautiful tropical island out there, and everyone is here to see it.
It's, uh,
So if you guys want to video, we'll get some island in there. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and restart. So thank you for the fun. We have to zero sometimes. So to start, ethics in multi and modern dog training. Question number 1. As someone who deeply values science and systems that promote real, measurable behavior change, I evolved in the dog training field with the belief that we were on the verge of something bigger. The vision where ethics often felt like a moving target based on what we with, and science was cherry-picked to support already held beliefs. I had built all the steps necessary to introduce data collection systems, and I left the field wondering, how do we as professionals create space for true scientific structure in dog training without it becoming politicized or weaponized by ideology? And what role should measurable outcomes, data, long-term welfare tracking actually play in how we define ethics? So the question is that last part. How do we create space for true scientific structure without politics, ideology, and what role should measurable outcomes, data, and long-term welfare tracking play in how we define ethics?
Well, yes, here we go with that one question. So, I mean, dog training is really a human, it's a field of teaching humans. You know, most of us do not teach in a circus. We're not teaching just dogs in a vacuum, right? So the politics, and it is going to always be that. Any scientific field, politics involved to a degree, and there's always bias, all sorts of bias. So I don't know if we can get rid of that. What we can do is better prepare dog trainers to learn how to collect data, track outcomes, and consider welfare and have a little bit more of formal training in ethics, per se, not just how I feel, not just what I personally believe, but understand the humanity of ethics. Now that said, all of those different, everything listed in that question, in the pre-question, there are so many different fields where you can become trained and you can become an animal welfare expert. You can become an ethics, PhD. You can become a behavioral science PhD. All of these things are not going to happen. You know, it would be ridiculous. You couldn't get 5 degrees before you became a dog trainer. And so that's not necessarily practical. What I think we can do is just teach. I think we need a pathway, a self-imposed pathway to better education. There are so many pieces of the pie when it comes to training dogs and getting people to train their dogs or live with their dogs. And most of us only learn from one mentor, maybe two, right? We learn one little piece of the pie, and then we're off and running and think we're a trainer. So I think the educationally, there aren't going to be universal standards of education. There'll probably be no new regulation, at least not in the United States. But we can self-police and try to rise the bar by having better educational systems that help the pieces of the puzzle, client communication, psychology, teaching, and things like that. Honestly, I think that's the best that we can do. And I don't know how you can get politics out of dog training. About now, or about anything where there's humans, right? It's not just dog training. Now, I think the last thing I want to say on this, not the last thing, we could do a day on this, is that science is beautiful, science is wonderful, science is important, ideally science is change everything, the more we know, the more we don't know, the more we have to continue to learn. And so I still think we can act as our absolute, and dog training is not just science. There's so much more to it that I think we can absolutely go too far in that direction and forget about the humanity and our training. We didn't get, I mean, science is very interesting, intriguing to most of them. That's what we got into dog training, right?
Yeah.
We got into it for our hearts and, and our histories and our cases, and it's a social, very social practice that we're in, right? And we have to do with people, what we do affects communities, and it affects our souls, we can't, it's not just science. So I don't know. I think there are, we should probably try to define something, how many pieces of the pie there are, and then find a way to, get people to have a more varied and the taste of everything. What do people need to learn in order to become a functional trainer at the pace, and then hopefully continue to encourage people to embrace lifelong learning.
Good answer. Yeah,
I don't know.
there's so much to
I
that.
don't know. It's possible.
I'm actually going to piggyback off something Kelly was saying. It's the different cultural aspects of it. So the person, I suspect the person that asked this question has either is coming from academic background and just starting out on the training side, because this is a phenomenon I see often. People get tired of miscommunication. And we're kind of using, was using a good analogy. I think we have so many different professions coming into it, meaning different areas of study. So you have the scientists.
It's just going to say that while it's charging you, isn't it?
All
As
right,
long as
so-
it's charging.
Yeah.
maybe.
Is it charging?
I don't know. It's the part.
We'll check it.
Okay.
Yeah. Or is there, it looks like bottom right.
Yeah, that's
Charging.
okay.
Okay, so it's just going to say that.
It's just unhappy.
Okay, so yes, the issue I see is a lack of communication or miscommunication, and it's kind of like what kind of saying. Think of it like the chefs in the kitchen, right? Like the practitioners, they're doing agility or training for fight sports or working with dogs in the gym. Those different specializations. But then you have like the food scientists that are telling you what's on the label. And there's a huge disconnect if those two parties would start talking to each other and using the language that they usually use. So the cooks in the kitchen, 86 the sauce or whatever, and then scientists might be like, what does that mean? Is that like a chemical composition or what is that? And the same thing I've seen happen in the dog training industry, where there's a huge lack of understanding of the words. So terms like aversive or punishment are going to mean different things to different people. So that's where they answer the question on data collection of their is you first have to establish a language that everybody understands. It means the same thing. And that's the huge disconnect we see all the time in the dog training conflicts is lack of proper understanding of the words, the terminology, such as
Standard definitions
exactly.
and, yeah.
And then it becomes a cultural tone aspect, because if you hang out with academics, if you go to conferences like PhDs and people researching things, maybe don't have a lot of training, you're going to hear different words, but you're also going to see them arguing with each other differently. So you'll see them insulting each other, but then be 2 minutes later having to drink at the bar together and be totally fine, because arguing academically is much different than dog trainers. So if you see a couple guys, I've seen it, people I know that are in the dog world, but they're on the academic side, and I see them really heated talking with each other, maybe on a panel talk, and oh my God, these two guys hate each other. No, that's just how they talk to each other, especially when they're reviewing each other's. Dog trainers on the other hand are really, really sometimes very nasty to each other, but they mean it. And then there's becomes this disconnect. So the person in academia that might have asked this question that came into the dog training field, what is going on here? Because they're, number one, using totally different language, but they're also talking to each other in a different way. So much disrespect. So that's another phenomenon. And that's where I see the issues lying, is that we have so many cooks in the kitchen from so many different cuisines in different countries and different fields of work that it's all getting lost in translation. So what we need, as Dad was saying, is everybody to get on the same page with communication, learn what the words are, and then get into the discussion using talking about welfare and ethics, because I can guarantee 99% of the trainers out there have zero formal education in welfare and ethics, including myself. Everything I've learned from welfare and ethics is much like what most academics learn, whereas there's some academics, maybe the person that asks this question, who does have a long-standing or even a doctorate level in welfare ethics or animal rights. So that's where the disconnect is. So talking to somebody that's completely in a different, mindset because of where they're at. And to finish it off, the last thing we're talking about sentient beings. Anytime you bring in dogs, children, cats, wildlife, or something that somebody cares about, you're going to have conflict no matter what.
It's going to be emotional.
It's So I mean, we'll dive deeper into people's perception of animal welfare. No matter what you do, you have to be prepared for different opinions, because they're sentient beings that people care about. If we're talking about food, probably different. But we're talking about dogs, animals. So you have to understand there's going to be an intermediate standard of emotions that are going to come into the picture in few points that also need to be considered. So,
Honestly, I think one of the things that would benefit us even more than learning all these various different sciences and different academic realms is just to learn how to debate.
Yeah.
And how to do that in a non-emotional way. That's what they're doing in academic. If you're an academic argument, it's not the same thing as an emotional argument. And that is really an emotion is very heavily into it, and I can't really deny that. But I had a list because I was really curious about what degrees you could get, to be a dog trainer, or to cover all of these things that were just mentioned in the question. Let me just show you which one, because it's I could take those how many degrees would you need? Animal welfare MS, animal welfare science, law, PhD in animal welfare, you want to read them all. Bioethics, it goes on anthrozoology.
Yeah,
You can't.
I can count on one hand.
Right.
In the industry, on thousands.
And if you are, you certainly aren't putting your hands on dogs very often, or listening to people. Getting all this food takes a lot of time. And I think at the end of the day, we are dog trainers. We are, unless you're working with academics, we need to put your hands on dogs, talk to people, practice talking to people, and practice getting a dog that doesn't know you, who doesn't know you, point A to point B, and actually learn some physical skills, because we are trainers. when you go into someone's house, they do not want to hear your ethics essay. You know, they don't. You should have a standard. You know, there are some of these things are extraordinarily important for us to consider in our work. But again, I think we have to be self-policing that way. I think we just need to raise the bar as to what's normalized and how a dog trainer behaves a dog amongst ourselves and put that together. We don't want to wait for regulation. I don't think we need regulation. We need people to come together and have these conversations. And like, wow, there's a shit ton to this. We need to put it together for people.
Yeah. Just one other quick thing that we'll get to the next question is that we're also a young field. So if you think about dog training as a field compared to other scientifically rigorous fields, we are young, we're babies. So if you think about the first trainers, what, 40 years ago when Keeler started, anything like before, this is like maybe 4 decades.
Yeah.
5 decades. If you include military dog training, that's it. To other science, other fields, biology, geology, medical, everything has had so much more time to evolve. And many of those fields don't evolve as sentient beings. So we have a lot more to actually get on the same page.
Now, dog training, certainly, or animal training, existed before that, but it was practical application, right? In the field, it was back to, I mean, when I started, it was an apprenticeship of some, but formalized, right? You just like went out there and did things, like volunteered, and, you know, like I think we need to bring that back. There's so many nuances. Science can be quite black and white, and what we do is not black and white. There is human emotion always involved. Our sentient beings have both ends of belief involved, and so that takes knowledge, skill, and then someone or something to help to wrap it up. And otherwise, what we are doing, this to me is the biggest ethical problem that we have in dog training, which is most of us, again, are cobbling together our own little work. It's no one's fault. We all did this. We're all still doing this. You cobble together your experience, and you have to decide when you're ready, for the most part, right? And then you are charging people to learn your craft and practicing the experience. That's how it's set up. And that's the problem. You know, as far as I'm concerned. And you don't have to be an expert. I think that's also.
Yeah.
What are you saying?
So I hope that answers the question. Yeah, great starter question.
Please. Ready for that.
Question number 2 is a twofer. If you could teach every dog of improving their quality of life, what would they be? And if you could wave a magic wand and make one thing standard practice that all dog owners do without question, what would that be? So 3 skills that the dog would learn and 1 standard practice for the owners.
Yes, I guess skills, like depending, again, talking about defining things, skills for me when I hear that means behaviors we teach the dog, classical breeding, and so on. You know, sit down, stay calm, walk nice and unleash skills. And so I'm going to go with the question like that.
Yeah.
And so if I'm going to the recall, we want to talk, especially when we get into some of the maybe later topics about having choices and people that off-leash time. So recall is probably one. And then the opposite of that is, which is just some sort of stationary behavior. So for all of the things we like to do, like going out hiking or going to a restaurant, in between requires a dog to be able to settle in spots and be able to manage that environment where it's probably settle. And then engagement through either just even when you ask their name or something that says, hey, give me your attention for a second because I'm about to ask you to do something else. So having that dog really be able to focus on when needed, not always, not like this hovering control, but actual response to their caretaker, the guardian. So those are probably 3 main skills. Because for me, in my world with aggression, it's a lot less sit down, stay calm. Exercises for what's going to be useful and adaptive to life that's out there. So, and then for The second part was
Wait,
the.
let's do one part.
Okay.
Oh, I'm gonna forget. So the first thing that came to my mind as the question was being read was settling. You know, that so many dog people are doing, especially if you're a trainer, you are doing active things, you're training things, you know, and you're trying to get them moving. And, so I think settle is huge. And I real settle. I don't mean train, stay on the mat. I think that's good too. But just how to settle down and do nothing without having to be forced all the time, that's activating. People don't like just freaking tether the dog next to you and sit and look and chill and give them some attention here and there. It's kind of, I always say like to my clients, it's remember when you were a kid and your parents just took you along for the day to like do errands and you have to go to the bank and then go to the dry cleaner and like this, you're not like, you just go, you just like, we're just doing this and it's life sometimes, right? You don't have to be entertained through it all. So settle, absolutely. The second thing that came to mind was social neutrality as a default, which is, I think too much emphasis is put on sociability versus social neutrality. That doesn't mean I don't want an anti-social dog, obviously. I mean, I ran a puppy training program for over 20 years where like, we did a lot of socialization. To me, I think that word is misconstrued or it's really not even the right word. Because I don't want a dog to be either super excited, if you're walking, just think about walking down the street with your significant other or your friend, and and then every time you pass somebody, I just go and shake their hand or give them a noogie, and they're just trying to walk down the street to get coffee, and like, this is embarrassing and weird, on the opposite, walking with me, hiding in big trees or trying to jumping every time somebody comes around the corner. Those things are uncomfortable and inappropriate. But if you run into somebody who you're going to say hello, or if somebody engages you with eye contact and it looks like they want to say hello, or have a polite greeting, and then maybe take it from there. And I think that's what sociability looks like. Real sociability is somebody.
Something else would be a social love.
Neutrality. Yeah. Oh, what did I say? And the third skill is recall. Yeah, I think because of the coffee like that can build that. Yeah.
Somewhere in those realms.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I have nothing against attention. Like you go up forever, there's important things, Yeah. So
and then the second one was what should the guardians know about or do, right?
If you could make one thing standard practice that all dog owners do, what would that be?
Assessing quality of life, probably. Checking the dog to see how they're doing. Because we are in our busy world, especially people that are really busy in some big city, some hustle, like it's laid back, right? In Costa Rica, a little more so than if you're like New York City. So you're gonna have different cultural awareness of things you're on train, or aware. Also, see a lot of these dogs are just everybody's so busy on here. Again, go to work with this, and then they totally forget the dog, or they don't recognize how the dog or their quality of life, so they get routine, established patterns of, oh, your dog's here, it seems okay, feed them, and then life goes on. Next thing 3 months go by, and he's walking in those next times. And knowing how to do it, and we can throw that buzzword around like quality. Like, so if I'm going to work with clients, I want to teach them for your individual dog to have meaningful and good quality of life. Because people think they give it to their dog, right? But it's not always true. They think that that's Louis Vuitton for their dog is really nice, but it's not quality of their dog. So I think that's probably me.
It's a good one. Yeah, we get to humans their own life and they're sentient adult beings and they're babies. For me, I was thinking about what task could they do? What task would you tell people to do?
Yep.
And for me, it would be to feed exclusively out of enrichment toys or hands. If I could get people to do that, life would be very different. And for enrichment toys, to me, I would teach people the difference between an active and a passive enrichment toy. So when the dog needs to be looking at what they need that day, do they need to play more? I'm busy. Do they need a puzzle toy or a little treasure hunt? Or do they need a passive calling to it because we're leaving the day? elements of hand feeding in there. So to me, there would be no food bowls. That could do something. It doesn't have to be difficult. Those soups are amazing. Everybody just the soup, then a dog. That's just you put kibble in. I've never had a dog that doesn't do that. It's not hard, so you're not asking too much. You know? And even hand feed up in handfuls. At least it's coming from you. You know, you may as well utilize. But that was something that people could do that wouldn't be like such a big deal.
Yeah, it's a good one.
They're both good.
Yeah.
Stephen Lindsay, the author of the books Applied Dog Behavior and Training, volumes 1 through 3, and originator of the least intrusive, minimally aversive LIMA principle, has made public statements that his work was misappropriated by organizations, by professional organizations, and intentionally altered to limit choices for dog professionals and owners. He has spoken about the fact that LIMA was never intended to be used apart from the other 3 pillars of standard praxis, and that such alternate versions of LIMA would be detrimental to the quality of life for both dogs and people. And I'd like to read you a quote from the CYNX-L certification course. He said, "Besides misrepresenting and confusing facts, excessive moralizing about the use of punishment and other aversive training procedures may have a very undesirable effect on the dog owning public, making responsible owners feel guilty about exercising the necessary aversive prerogative needed to establish constructive limits and boundaries over a dog's behavior. Many of the basic facts of life that all dogs must learn to accept if they are to become successful and welcome companions are won through the mediation of genetic training, finding a balanced application of behavior modification, not just positive reinforcement. Instead of grinding away at a very dull necks, dog's welfare is better served by teaching the owner when punishment is necessary and how to use it effectively and humanely." So that's Steve Lindsay, the originator of LIMA. The question is, do you agree that LIMA was misapplied to further an agenda? Why or why not?
That's a fun question. That's not the question. I thought that was coming. I don't know. It was happening. I was not involved in any organization. Probably, maybe you know more about this. So I don't know what the agenda was. I will say in a more general sense that I have a lot for a really long time in the industry, probably longer than anyone in this room, because I'm old. I started training when I was 22, I think. I mean, formally, you know. So I do not know any that are intentionally being misleading in order to further an agenda. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but I don't know that it's like planned. You know, I think people get really emotional. With emotions, really dug in deep their own feelings and beliefs, and that will absolutely shape their decisions and the outcomes that will happen in different organizations. So that's, I don't know much.
Yeah, you're right for what else.
Yeah, you're really old, Kelly.
Well,
you're right. No, but seriously, I think I'm a decade doing it at least, you know. So, yeah.
I've seen some rumblings over the last couple of years about my time with the IAABC. So if you're not familiar with that term, it's the International Association of Animal Behavior Businesses. And I think back that I was president from 2013 to 2017. So 9 years ago since I left. But up to 5 years after I left, I'm still getting emails about that. I don't really see like, Mike, I need my credit. I've been president for a half a decade. So it shows me that people still thought I was a organization, which is fine. You know, proud of the time I spent there. I'm working with some really amazing people for an amazing organization. So, so I wanted to give you a little history on that, where I was. And at the time, when I started with the IWC, Lima had already been adopted. It was the founding members. Lynn Hoover is the founder of IWC, but I'm not sure of the history of when people was officially adopted. That was a little while.
Yeah, so there was a
7, 8 years, something like that after I really thought that I came in. And there had been changes already before. So I'm not sure, I can't say for sure, I can't speak of the history exactly when it was adopted. I came in when it was already there, so I was aware of it. My role for ILIVE was to implement the certification app that they had been started. It was standard application, but it was not efficient at all. So that was what I was tasked for. So Lima was there, something I used as a foundational aspect of our organization and how applications in our community, things like that. That being said, when there were some suggestions for changes in Lima, and the interesting thing too is that Lima, people who probably are familiar with Lima, intrusive memory aversive. For whatever reason, just having the term aversive in there was bad for some people. So if you say minimally aversive, you're still a lot of aversives. And that argument was, I completely understand where Stephen and others have said it was taken and we're removing an important piece of it when you're saying, okay, now there's people that don't want to use aversives. And for me, that was silly because it's impossible. It's impossible not to use an aversive when you talk about aversives in the scientific definition of aversive. It doesn't. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's not a moral or unmoral thing, right? It's a thing that describes a phenomenon or stimulus. So that being said, legal was always there, and attribution was always given to Stephen when I was there. It was actually the first attribution position. I'm sorry, no, it was the Lima principles is what it was called first. Where I came in was when Dr. Friedman's humane hierarchy was brought into the mix, and that was around 2015. And I take responsibility for not keeping the word principles. We changed it to the position statement because people were asking, well, what do you mean you can use aversives? And like, well, we're not saying that's the first thing we're reaching for. That native Stephen, right? So we're talking about it's part of it. It's punishment is there, including in Susan Friedman's human hierarchy. Punishment is still part of the hierarchy. And so people were getting up and arms about their punishment. And again, what does that look like for you? Because punishment is the verb, if you're looking at it from an academic sense of what punishment actually means. It describes an adjective. So if you are using punishment, you don't know if you are until after you've evaluated and tracked the data that says you've seen a reduction in the frequency of a particular target behavior because of the intrusion of the stimulus or removal of the stimulus, right? That's the definition of punishment. It's a reduction in behavior or replace a behavior to get to the technical aspects of the plan. So, so that was where I could see then getting done on that. But at that time, I left the organization because I was getting burnt out of the work and then also life. So, again, I need to make more time for things like that. But yeah, I left IWC, and at the time I left, Stephen's work was great. On the position statement. So, but as we know, and as Sarina knows, when you are in a board or you work for an organization, it's not just you. So yes, I was the president, but I was not in the organization after I left, and that's why I can see people still pick up this updated changes that happened in a decade after, close to a decade after I left. So, so to answer the final question is, do I think it? What was the word for it? I think it was adapted or.
Do you agree that Lima was misapplied to further enrich it?
Yes, yeah. So the last 7 to 8 years, I've seen changed quite a few times. I've seen different iterations and different arguments. It had gotten changed so much in the last few years that I stopped paying attention because I just couldn't keep up with all of the changes and arguments. Yeah.
Do you think that's good? You think? Like, what are they?
100%, yeah. So, but it's not necessarily a bad goalpost. We want to be kinder to animals. We want to eliminate the use of versus whenever possible. But you not make this is where the moral, ideological side comes in, and that's where it gets muddy. Because you have some people involved in those organizations out there. Let's pay attention to the science and the academics and the data. And then you have other people like, no, we must be kind to all animals. All our verses are on the table because they're sentient beings, but they're not looking at the science on it either. So that's what you have.
Science. Of the science.
Yeah. So when you have a board involved or multiple people involved in any organizational aspect, you're gonna have a lot of voices and influences. And then when you have multiple organizations, multiple conversations, it really gets funny. That's again what's happened in the last 5 years. And then so the crazy thing is just like when LIvestreaming was first started, everyone's like, yes, great, we got something that's going to not be low key, right? So just all punishment. We call traditional training, just having it going back 4 decades ago. Everyone's like celebrating these, right? And that's why when it was with IWC, I'm like, great, it's good. We want to limit the use of verses. Well, we're going in the right direction here. We didn't go closer to the body. We didn't move it.
Yeah.
But it was probably before. So, and then you got to do this, which is not a bad thing. We all want better. But when you start to pull in the moral ideological aspects of it, people having opinions because of what they perceive as good welfare, or we're not discussing welfare is and what ethics is, that's when it becomes a problem. So politics get involved, favoritism, all of those things become a problem within the industry. So that's, yeah, to answer the question, I witnessed that in the last decade or so, probably the last 30 years or so in different iterations. And anybody who's been in the while will say the same thing. Say the same thing. Like I recognize the fighting. It's always happening, fighting happening all the time. Like, to answer the main question here, yeah, it's for I've seen the CPR just kind of like moving along, and it's the only time I've never talked to Steve much of it, but I understand maybe purposely or just doesn't want to help stop it.
He's like,
Which I totally
done
like.
with you people.
Good idea. But yeah, good idea. But yeah, so it's unfortunate. I wish I had more opportunity to talk directly, but response. I did talk to one of his proteges. I won't mention who it is, who was trying to communicate sort of as for Stephen, but you're only going to get so far to a communicator. So it's communicating to a board that's also holding things. So, so that's the history of it, or at least from what years ago.
As an offshoot to that, I think you touched on this, but it's super important to I think keep in our mind. Aversive does not need to be painful or scary. And aversives happen every day to everyone. I know there's like the seatbelt analogy, but I think it's real. It doesn't change. What changes behavior, right? And that's not universal. What is aversive or uncomfortable or annoying to one might be unpleasant to another. So there isn't one specific that we can use for that. And I don't think that an aversive be totally taken out of context and pulled out everywhere. I don't think an aversive needs to be a last resort. It's part of its information. If you're doing it in a kind and clear way, I think that what is aversive? To be, to look at the dog's butt down. That's not what I would do. But they mean like it's. I don't think. Of course, we've got to be kind to dogs. I don't think that that's what we're arguing about. I think what we're arguing about is how to be clear, efficient, and kind. Have any of you ever played, the hot and cold game? You're the person out there to figure out the heck you correct your laws. That's hot. Let's play the hot game, which goes right to my point. If you only did that with the hot, which means you're getting closer, right? They're older. You know, if you're in the middle of a room and there are 360, you could be going in any direction. There are 359 directions that are wrong, even when you start your path. You know, I don't find it kind at all or efficient at all to not tell them when they're on the wrong track. You know, but that doesn't mean we're going to touch them, burn them, talk them. You know, it's just giving information, right? It is a kindness to have both sides of the coin, both kinds of feedback. I think it's very frustrating at the very least. If you're not telling someone on the track, they can go the other direction for 3 miles, not knowing whether they're actually getting closer, just having a problem with them, you know. So that's maybe a discussion for another day. But I find that we are arguing like with the sledgehammer, when again, there's a lot of nuance.
Yeah.
Thanks. And I wasn't going to participate in the discussion at all. I was just going to be your disembodied voice, but I feel like I need to say one thing, and that is least intrusive and really aversive is actually not referring to necessary training tools, referring to the relationship in the dog and the dog. So there was a big misunderstanding even just from the foundation.
Yeah.
So, question number 4.
Yep.
We all agree that board-based training works for many dogs. That's not in dispute. But we also know that no method works for every context. And sometimes training doesn't reach the level of reliability needed for safety. When that happens, the solution becomes long-term management, constant leashing, avoidance routines, craving, muzzles, medication, or shrinking the dog's world. How do you weigh the lifetime welfare cost of that against other options, including the contingent use of courses that might actually resolve the behavior and restore more freedom and autonomy for the dog? Put another way, is it more ethical to permanently restrict the dog's life because the training felt gentler, or to accept brief discomfort if it means the dog has more freedom long term?
Can you, there was the first question of that one. Can you just repeat that?
The last part of the first part of the
Yeah,
last
it was
question.
how you,
Sarina?
just the first
I
part.
can, although I just got a message from someone that the sound isn't very good.
Okay.
Can you try holding the mic closer to your mouth?
Yeah.
Let's try that.
Are you guys watching video on this again? Is your closed caption on?
Captions on? We can also do post-production.
Just I want the closed caption doesn't that understand.
No, it's not that.
Oh,
Is that something I can activate now?
yeah, that's a,
Sorry.
that's sometimes the way, but I'll just go closer, so,
Okay.
yeah. Actually, whoever's commenting. So, comment in there.
Yeah. Let me know.
Okay,
Okay, so you want me to repeat?
just that, there's one part.
The last part?
This, the first question. Yeah, it's like, how do you reconcile that, or how do you?
So when the solution becomes long-term management, constant leashing, avoidance routines, crates, muzzles, medication, or shrinking the dog's world, how do you weigh the lifetime welfare cost of that against other options, including the contingent use of courses that might actually result in behavior and restore more freedom and autonomy to the dog? Put another way, is it more ethical to permanently restrict a dog's life because the training felt gentler, or to accept brief discomfort means the dog has more freedom?
This is such a great question, and it's one that I've seen over the years many times. It's part of the trainer questions. And so I'm careful on my answer here. Sometimes the answer is not what is expected, it's wanted, because there's how the question's asked. Not that the question being asked right now is that. I'm just saying I'm going to be careful about how I answer this because sometimes people will take it, oh, Mike said it's totally fine to do all the time, which is not true. And that's where all these positive trainers, all they want to do is medicate dogs and they don't love dogs, and that's their answer, which is a big misconception. Just like when positive trainers like, all else people do is shock dogs and they're just cool and all this thing. Sorry, it's reading the screen.
there's a warning.
Unstable connection, but it should still be done.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. So that being said, yeah, maybe it's an experience thing. It's who is there to evaluate. Is it truly the dog cannot be off leash or not, has to be contained all the time, or the medication is working or not, or whatever is being tried, right, to control the dog, is that really working? So who's making that decision? Because that's where the ethics come in. Okay, which will be to so you need more than one set of eyes on a case. So for me, ethics should have. So that's why we're having things like this, where we get together and we share ideas about cases, to help situations, right? It's so much better when we have other sets of eyes, even if they're not experienced. Because getting back to the first question, so many different voices in our leverage that. Like we might have a border collie that has separation anxiety and also aggression towards visitors and is, quarantined because it just bit somebody. So we've got all these quality of life choices and everything happening. So I am for sure going to talk to my wife about the separation anxiety point. I'm going to talk to somebody that's really knowledgeable about border collies, for instance, if I'm not familiar with them. And that's where the nuance comes in so crucial to evaluating all those things before you reach for an aversive experience for that dog, right? Because anybody who's worked with aversives, meaning who's to suppress behavior, is going to be able to manage it, stop it, just like any content trainer who's tons of management tools and is able to say, oh, the dog's not going to fight anybody if I put it behind a baby gate and create it, right? And the other trainer might say, oh, no, the dog's not going to fight anybody if I have an patient involved. That behavior. And both sides could be right in that moment, but who's to say so? Right? Who's to say for sure? And that is where it boils down to the experience and having a conversation with others, but most importantly, the person, the dog's that person's life, because if not, nobody else in the world's going to know what's going on in that case. And that's the difference. People argue about, like, how are you working with this tool or this aggressive dog? I can't do it all the time. I've had it every single time. Let me see you work with this dog using that technique. Okay, sure, I'll show you a 2-second video of me working with a dog with this technique, but that's not telling me anything about the tell you about the clients in the situation. It doesn't tell you about their findings. It doesn't tell you about their ability to train. It doesn't tell you about the dog's experiences, their health, their environment, where they came from, their genetics. It doesn't tell you about there's so many more variables that come into a case that this particular training tool with this aversive experience. So, yes, if an aversive experience is warranted for some cases, we may reach for that, but it's not going to be the first thing I do. It's going to be making sure I evaluate all of those other things I just talked about before you talk about it. And then talking to guardian about what they want as an outcome and aversive if they want to warranted in this case or not. So that's why you can't have this discussion online. It never works online because there's just people aren't aware of the case. It's like talking about someone's heart surgery, right? The options. Who's going to take that? If I go, is the doctor going to go on Facebook and say, what should I do? Or are they going to talk to a patient? Right? So same thing when we're talking about cases that potentially could require an aversive experience, we're going to dive deep.
Guys, we are getting requests for you to move closer to the camera so that people can see your faces a little bit better, since we don't have closed captioning.
How's that?
Really great. This is a huge, important part of your discussion.
That's a little bit better.
You want to sit there? No, thanks. I'm good. This is why, I have so many things to say now, throw me off there. This is why mentorship, it's not just discussion. This is why trainers should be working with other trainers. This is why I started what I'm doing. It's, we are the closest field to what we do. Most of us work as dog trainers. It's like family counselor, therapist. I mean, yes, there's technical skills that we need, but in most cases, we're in the home, right? We're teaching, working with a family dynamic, a community dynamic, and being of study of being of another species. And so, to become a psychologist, you go through all the education, which we already don't have. We don't have a clear pathway. That there's where you can just say, I am now officially a dog trainer or a behavior counselor. So there's already like this amorphous kind of system, and then we're just set free upon the world after gaining knowledge about the experience and the nuance and the support, right? So they get like 3,000 hours of supervision actually while they're seeing clients before they practice out on their own. So having a group, it doesn't have to be me. I mean, it's an offering now. I want lots of experienced trainers to offer that. And coaching is different than mentorship. Someone who has been in the field for 5 years, who has won some beautiful competitions and heals beautifully, or is the champion and whatever, is very skilled as a dog trainer. They might not know anything about behavior modification and raising a puppy. Those are coaching programs to me. If you want to learn how to heal, you go to one of those people. If that's very important. It's lovely if it fits your agenda. It's not the same thing as if you're a practitioner. The bread and butter is helping people in homes with their companions. Then that's not what you're doing. That is not your job. 9 times out of 10, and you need support. And it's never too late to get support. And I think this is one of the biggest reasons why we have so much imposter syndrome in our industry, because a lot of people are not, don't have the education skill, and they're faking it as they learn, and then you kind of get stuck because now you're a professional, you can't ask any questions anymore. God forbid you ask questions, especially online, right? So learning how to get stunted at a certain point if you have that certification, and again, usually you're certified to work with a piece of the pie, right? You learn from one person, from one area, and then you're going out and taking broad cases. So that's also a problem. There's something else to this now. When using aversives, so there's so many ones. And someone having people to talk to, whether it's an informal training group or a community that you've joined where you feel safe, or having a mentor or mentors is, I think, essential. I don't think it's really optional. I don't think it should be optional. But also, when it comes to and this is where welfare and ethics come in. I actually have a little something that I thought something like this might come up, that I think are that list of things that I think are important. But before I get to that, the problem I have with aversive, I don't have a problem with aversive in the sense that it can be just to say, hey, knock it off, or close the door, or what is it, whatever it may be. When you're talking about tools or physical, punishment, I suppose, really is what most people are talking about, isn't it? A lot of tools. That's really what people are fighting about most of the time. No,
it's unfortunate.
all right. Well, punishment is people, including trainers who are schooled in that, often go to it too quickly without having the skill to actually change behavior in other ways. And certainly our clients, we are humans. We tend to expect the good and then get really irritated or angry about the bad, right? So we don't say thank you every day when the dog is doing things, but we don't say thank you to each other every day when something goes well. You expect it to go well, but if the day it doesn't, you're going to hear about it, right? You loaded the dishwasher 6 days out of 7, nobody says a damn thing. That one day that you don't, someone's going to come and call you out, right? So that's humans, unfortunately, and I think part of our job is to mirror what we'd like to see more of in the world and get more reinforcement in there first. I would just argue that most trainers' skill level is still not high enough to entertain the idea of punishment because the skill isn't trained to fluency before they're bringing punishment in. That's the problem that I have with it, honestly. And I see that in not just brand new trainers, but this isn't, I mean, it's, I guess it is a call out in a sense. It's people whose growth stagnates when they become a professional, when they're afraid to train in front of other people, they're afraid to go and try something new, or they're afraid to step out of their dogma or methodology and ask questions. And I get why people are afraid to be wrong. I mean, I think with the dawn of social media, it's caused more division in every way. It's made people more afraid. When we were really just going to conferences in person and seeing each other, people were more open. And people did, you get to see that whether or not that person trains like you, or whether or not you know how they train, you can have a discussion. Maybe you've seen them with their dog in the lobby and you know they love their dog. And now when you hear that they also use a collar, you weren't grasping your pearl, clutching your pearls. You were just like, oh wow, that's different. You know? So I think there's a lot more work to be done in order to. I don't think that the question is punishment allowed. I don't think that's the question. I think the question is, have you not tried everything, but are you good enough to? In the first place.
Yep.
Jump around. Okay, regarding behavioral euthanasia, what level of harm is an automatic case? And with positive case, some people say positive, never deviate. Others say every method tried before making that decision. What do you think is the best final approach for dogs whose owners try to hide everything? Do you let the dog go to sleep with measures?
Sorry.
Again, I think it's the wrong question. No. The question is, what is the level of liability? Is that to society, to the household, and the method to me is really the first question. If the dog has bitten at level 5 to a human, we have to give serious thought as to how that dog can live in society in a home. And it's been always failed. We hear it, it is true. I don't know who we are. We're humans, and we don't live in a vacuum. Even if I were perfect, a lot of dog trainers are pretty OCD and neurotic about safety and protocols, but we live with other people, and other people visit. So I think, I don't think there's a black and white though. That if a dog is a level 5 fighter, I mean, every single dog who's ever been level 5 is level 5. But other than that, the other level depends. It depends. You have to. This is where the ethics come in. Where does the dog live? Who does the dog live with? What will the quality of life look like for that dog? Will their basic needs be met? And that's an individual decision.
Does somebody voice living again?
But yes,
Isn't that the answer to the dog training question?
is the
Depends.
It's the new. It depends. It's the nuance of the situation. If a dog has unalived a human, then that's that, as far as I'm concerned. If a dog has put somebody in the hospital, I don't mean they had to go to the hospital and get a few stitches, but they're in the hospital, we have to be giving this some very serious thought. If the dog is in a non-predatory way, unaliving other animals, meaning not rabbits, in the field, then I think we have some serious considerations, right? But we have to just you do have to look at that case by case. I'm not a black and white person, but just not.
Yeah, this is another question that comes up a lot. I get this question a lot, sort of just testing, where you at on this? And the first question I should make is that you must euthanize your dog. I've never come out of my mouth once ever in my life. It's always the guardian, so the organization or the person shelter or rescue or party that happens their own dog. It's always up to them. It's not my dog. I will give them the information. Way up a number of variables. I use an 18 variable checklist actually that I walk them through. Then they can make the decision from an educated, as best they can, educated standpoint versus me making the decision for them. And we certainly should not be making those kind of decisions online, regardless of what we hear, because we don't know the whole story, no matter what, unless you're actually the one working the case over there. So a good question, though, if you want to ask it, is people are like, oh, it's always best for discomfort, or people are euthanizing dogs like crazy. Well, ask the question is, if that's the case, then what about if I ask you a question? This is, would you feel comfortable living with this dog right next door to you, with your kids, your family, your dogs, and or would you adopt this dog because it clearly needs a home, right? And the answer is no. You could what? Wait a second. If I'm not comfortable with the dog living right next to me, why should I do that to somebody else in society? So that's ethics, right? That's perfect ethical questions. Like if I'm okay risking society but not myself, how is that ethical?
People do that all the time,
Yeah,
though, right?
Yeah, they try to push it, save them all, but okay. Do you have a home here? You don't take this dog on, right? It's good. If you want to save them all, you got to ruin your home. You supposedly know how to work with this dog, right? So that's part. And the other part is again the knowledge and nuance around it. It's you could say level 5 biter, right? And a lot of people are like, whoa, level 5 biter. What if it was a service dog, golden retriever, that got hit by a car and somebody's lifting it up and the dog's screaming in pain and just in shock and doesn't know what it's doing and turns around and bites somebody like on the arm, level 5, for the first time in its life, 8 years later. Is that a euthanasia case? Is that a severe case? Is that someone's really dangerous dog? Or what if I said, I've got a level 2 biter? Maybe most people are level 2. Like, if those cases, oh, that's not dangerous. But what if it's a dog that bites children in the face at level 2? And it lives in a home with kids, and then lives next to a day school, and kids for babysitting. And so you add these complexities and the nuances, and that makes the difference in the complexity of it. So when we talk about true risky cases, you have to evaluate those things and the quality of life before, again, you look at it saying, we're going to use X, Y, or Z method or tool that may or may not contain an aversive. And all of them. It doesn't have to, for me, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to use an aversive. It could be we're going to incorporate things. Right? We don't know if that'll be aversive to the dog or not. Is it going to help or not? Is it going to do the thing? No, we don't know until we try it. So we are implementing something that could potentially impact the quality of life. And that's why nuance is so important to discuss. We have to talk about those layers that are in between these huge things we talk about. Behavior euthanasia or not, tools or not. That's not the discussion. It's those quality of life, the ethics, the risks to the public, so many of the variables that need to be weighed in. And then we can talk about the tools, okay? And then most of the time, you're realizing that that's just a small part of the equation. It's such a small part of the discussion to talk about, oh, we have to use this tool to save this dog's life. Maybe, but definitely not as commonly as people think.
I think it's, I don't really, like, when people say that, like, oh, would you rather not ever punish this dog than euthanize the dog for biting or aggression? Like, to me, that's, are you suggesting we suppress the aggression out? Like, that's not, you know, I mean, what are they, like, I don't understand what they're trying to do. You have to kind of know, like, again, why is this happening? Is it the kind of thing where it is a one-time thing, or is the dog, you know, emotionally distressed, defensive? Is this a learned thing over time? You know, but I just don't understand. Like, you can't really correct an emotion away, punish an emotion away, really.
Right.
So that's where that doesn't really hold water for me. And that's not where I would decide on to range, honestly, with severe aggression. To me, that's
another one that requires definition in these discussions, right?
Yeah, like for me, the recall quality discussions were interesting to me and clear. Then this dog is like biting kids in the face, and we're going to punish him into doesn't do that, like that is a real slippery slope. Like that's not the question. I think it's a weird, not a weird question. I think it's a trap or a misunderstanding.
Next question.
Right.
In our field, everyone says they support good welfare for them to work with. But how can we ensure that the education we're getting about welfare is validated, not a simple opinion? I'm concerned about presenting dog training professionals as welfare oriented. These subjects are active areas of study, and we need to have more voices in the field who are actual welfare and ethics specialists who have a formal education in ethics and welfare. Why is it important to be educated about ethics and welfare, and what formal education ethics and welfare?
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of question slash because I think everybody who gets into the field should start with that. But unfortunately, when we were talking earlier about the different programs people come up to, it's part of some programs you see out there, but it's sometimes glossed about. It's like about veterinary school behavior, like one semester, so safety with dog treats, welfare and ethics may or may not even come into the picture. It's academies or things like that. It's touched upon, some of the hierarchies are touched upon, things like that, but it's been talked about enough. And so I 100% agree, it should be, we're missing a lot of things, a lot of areas of study. One of the big ones for me is the human side of the work we do. So human behavior consulting, human psychology,
Yes.
crucial
Absolutely.
conversations, being able to hold space for people in a way that supports them and makes them feel safe with you when you're working with them, because we are working with their right? And it's a really important work. So the welfare ethics, human consulting, all of those things definitely welfare for me is it's a big word and a big field, because yes, we all want to say of course we care. What does welfare mean to you? What kind of welfare do you believe in? And so we have to, number one, as an industry, get on the same page of and what does that mean? And then we just talk about plan. We can get deep into that. Live with a vegan. And then that's part of the welfare is kind of looking at the life through the lens of the dog. Ethics is sort of like how we feel the dog should be living. That's our influence. And rather than just looking through the lens of the dog, we still look through the lens of the dog. And I come from more of like a care ethics view, sort of a pluralistic view in ethics too. So I don't just stick in one lane of ethics. It's definitely not me. It's more of a care ethics and concern for the animal first, and that forms opinions on what I think dogs experience, right? So very important that we separate, we define how each person's going to use that. We're not all going to agree on welfare ethics anytime soon, but we talk about what those things mean. Formal education was the last part of the question. I have no formal university. Yeah. I've been fortunate to learn from folks in different parts. It's like I have in both training career, but and I will also 100% implore anybody who does specialize in this topics does reach out to me. That's one of the favorite things to do is to bring in guests, podcasts, webinars, all the different platforms I have to talk about these things. So a lot of human consulting for the last year, but recently trying to bring in specialists from other academia and other parts of the dog world so they can actually educate the rest of us. And that's the point of collaboration and workshops like this, so we can talk about these things. So.
I'm getting ready to go back to school. So I also that my mic is working.
Your mic is
working? Yeah. So people couldn't hear me the last question. Next question, coming from a positive reinforcement trainer. There are trainers who use all four quadrants, applied with knowledge, intention, and respect for the animal. The methods are not inherently abusive and are not synonymous with control, force, or violence. While the might community continues to insist they are. This diversity suggests that our current terminology and understanding is insufficient. It obscures meaningful distinctions in methodology, intent, and welfare outcomes. Isn't it time that influential trainers get on board with understanding and supporting quote-unquote balanced training? Although she also made a thank you word. Can we agree to stop claiming our plus our only ways are the best? What do you envision as the best future for our profession and a path to that future?
Can you scroll that down so I can get a nice look at it as we speak? Yeah, I think there's a huge gap in the conversations and the education that most dog trainers have access to, that in the area of just discussing methods, the pros and cons of each method, the benefits, the fallout, the kind of cases where we might entertain these ideas, how other people are using them successfully, where they fall short in general. And that's something that I've started really doing. It's very well received because it's not fair. It's very hard to get just a straightforward answer. You, as a sentient adult with your own experience, can make your own decisions. And I think that's tremendously important. I agree, balanced isn't the word. Everything in life should be in balance. That is a lesson that keeps coming to me, personally. But balance and training, that's not what I see. When I see a trainer who does use tools or aversives or any kind of pressure, I see in most cases, yes, there are extremes, but extremes are on the edges for a reason, right? This is not the average trainer. I'm speaking to the norm, the huge group in the middle. Balanced trainers aren't balanced. They're extremely reward based, and they also then use some form of pressure or correction. So that's not even balance there. What balance to me means the middle. I don't see a lot of people working in the middle. Almost never, right? So we do need a new word. I agree. Yes, can we agree? I can agree that we can stop saying any one methodology is, and I think we can make decisions based on a more well-rounded education with some welfare parameters. Ethics are very personal, as you said, but that's a whole different story. In order to better serve our clients and just be better informed and more professional. You can still have your go-tos, but to not acknowledge that other things work or know how things work, or to argue that certain things are, these gross overstatements about either side. That's ridiculous. That's not where people are working. The best path to the future is, I think, in-person communication, workshops, conferences, and also utilizing the tool, the technology that we have, not to argue online on social media, but to meet in groups and to find your community in more not like a specific ways. Don't give up on technology, but join a group. Don't just argue with random people online, kind of thing. Technology can absolutely bring us together if we allow it, but I don't think this can be done on social media. I think it's more community-based work. And conferences don't have to be in people, but there has to be social experience in order for us to see people better. And just like we're doing right here, right now. I think you'll be training until today. This is our third or fourth day. We may have had side conversations and such, but here we are hanging out and just, again, getting to know, looking at each other's pictures of dogs and hearing the love and affection that everybody has for not only their dogs, but maybe their cats or their horses or their kids or other projects that they like to do. And then you have a full picture of a human being And from there, you can have a conversation. So that's how I hope the future goes.
Yeah. Good answers. So for me, this again goes, it's historical, this question, because it's one that we've seen and I can feel it in the question. When we start talking about the quadrants, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, all those things, it was great when it first came out. It's like Lima. I was like, oh, great. Good things to happen. Right? And then some reason they became the 10 Commandments, right? And then some thou shalt not use negative reinforcement or positive punishment because there's somehow the moral ideology got led into the quadrant, which is inappropriate because the quadrants are simply describing what's happening. It's evaluating the outcome and indices of behavior consistency. That's what they're there for. Not just saying this is terrible for the dog. No, we're evaluating, talking about quadrants. So somehow they got, anybody's using negative reinforcement, they're the devil, they're abusive. I started seeing these arguments. I remember when Richard Stewart, when people are saying that is negative reinforcement, she's the devil. I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like, this is where we're going with this. Because people, and most trainers realize, actually, there's people that question up there because there's actually can we agree to stop aiming for positive reinforcement? Only ways are the best. That this person probably doesn't feel that way, but that is the messaging in the community.
Yeah.
So it's almost like quoting scripture from those 10 Commandments. Is what's happening there. This person's been probably so, it's like such a statement that's just been parroted over and over and over. That's repeated here in a question that somebody doesn't even agree with anymore. And that's what.
As our plus trainer.
Exactly. This person's saying that they're a positive reinforcement trainer. So, yeah. So, that's the issue for me with seeing these quadrants used in the wars. They're just it's like saying it's 50 degrees outside. That's the way we should look at it, and not saying because it's 50 degrees out. It's just describing what's happening in our observations. Now, what's the last part of the question?
You guys really like that one.
3 questions. Back to the future, envisioning best. We're seeing a good path because we've moved on from the days everybody was using only heavy hand technique. We're seeing an evolution in the industry, so we are a good path. Just doesn't feel like it. Or worse, there's much worse happening in the industry right now. So we are on a good path. We just have to get back to professional dialogue, and that's not happening on social media. It's not happening in the way we're. That is because we've lost our languages with each other. We've made up new languages, and shows that just this question is that when you have, and there's this fancy word, it's called gizmogenesis. And when you have two sides, they start to actually reinforce each other's negative behavior to where you're seeing these more extremes.
Yes. Oh, that's a word. Yes.
Yes. It happens in the community in the 1930s, this concept. It's when community starts with this group, so then you have two sides for what you have in this industry. And everybody puts their team shirts on, say it's the red shirts and the blue shirts, right? And the red shirts are saying, okay, you guys are doing it wrong. And the blue shirts are like, whoa, no, we're doing it right. And you guys turns into more divisiveness. Oh, you guys are we're free of what you're doing, right? We're glue free. And the red team's like, no, you guys, it gets more and more divisive. And what happens? It becomes this reinforcing behavior because they start from back and forth, more extreme standpoints come out. Then what happens is that if you're wearing a blue shirt or a red shirt, you're automatically associated with the behaviors of that whole team. So if somebody on the blue shirt team goes and says, you're an asshole to one of the red shirts, they're going to be like, all of the blue shirt teams are going that way. They're all going to treat you like that. So then that's where the problem becomes, because somebody could be going in, like this person asking a very genuine, nice question. Some red shirt team could be like, oh, this person's going to be a jerk. They're going to say something nasty, so I'm going to troll them. And or worse, again, the worst behaviors we're seeing in this industry. That's the phenomenon that happens, and that is exactly to the T what's happening in the dog training industry. So that, to answer the question, what's the path to the future? We need to recognize that that's what happens in the industry, the great divide, and the stone throwing is becoming worse, just like we see around the world right now in places. So we need to not say we gotta support balance training or support positive, and we need to support each other and get into the same page of conversation, using the right language, making sure we're all talking about the same terminology. When we say averse, therefore punishment doesn't equate with evil or abuse, or academic terms if we use them the right way. So, so that's the path forward. We are on a good path. And I just finished this. For me, coming from a very heavy-handed background, I started using e-commerce, joke teams, marketers. I would say I wasn't balanced. I was traditional when I first started. Did not use treats when I first started. So that, of course, changed. The question should always be, before I reach for this thing that could be an aversive, we don't know if it's aversive, the dog will tell us, but if it could be an aversive, what can I do that might be different where I don't have to employ aversive experience with the dog? And if you bring your philosophy into that, you're constantly checking yourself, right? And then if you say, well, I don't have an answer, I feel this aversive is going to work, you use that aversive because that's what you know at the time. And that's what we need to discuss, right? It's like, okay, there's solutions for this, but are there other options? Who can I learn from options? Or maybe there is no options, and who can I actually validate this particular case with? And that's how we keep moving forward. Because if we have that, then we're seeing the industry doing that anyways. But what's going to happen is you're going to have two industries involved, and that's going to be a problem. So, yeah, long-winded answer to that. That's a great question.
Go ahead and read the last question, which is,
Okay, this is the last one? Yeah. In your area of specialty, what do you think is the lowest hanging fruit for improving welfare for dogs and people?
Okay, welfare for dogs and people. It's even the same thing. That's the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess
There's two parts to that. So.
Sorry, now it's really taking a little bit of stuff. So, lowest hanging fruit for improving welfare for dogs and people. For dogs, I think an understanding that they are sentient beings that have a different. I would like people to understand and honor dogs more for what they are versus for what they bring to us, or for what they do for us. You know, it's not just, you don't bring a dog into your life just because you want a companion on Saturday night. You have to take into consideration what that dog needs. To come to your point earlier, right? What I would like to see people just honoring their dog's dogginess rather than trying to stop everything. You know, it shouldn't be. You know, how do I always get my dog to stop? Can you get him to stop? Why you stop him doing this? Stop him doing that. This is annoying. Why is the dog doing it? How can we give them an appropriate outlet? I'd like for people to think about that. You know, dogs are, yes, they're very adaptive. Yes, they've chosen, over time to live with us. They're really brilliant at that. But we just take it for granted. And as we lose touch with the natural world, we become more sedentary and technologically based, we are just dragging them along with us. And I think you see a lot of the problems that we have today because we don't want dogs to be dogs. So for dogs, just honoring their dogginess and understanding that, embracing that, and respecting that. And most hanging fruit for people, welfare. I mean, is it the same thing? Like, if the dogs are being honored, is that better welfare for people? I don't know. I mean, it brings harmony. So maybe it does. For them. If your dog is happy and fulfilled, you have less problems. If you understand who they are, what they are, and provide outlets for what they need to do, rather than just trying to stop everything, you will have more harmonious relationship. Maybe even learn to really enjoy all the aspects of your dog, not just the hormone side or whatever it is you got your dog.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo a lot of what Kelly said because for me, it's, it depends on the dog, so it depends, each dog's gonna be individual, but for the vast majority of dogs and people, the lowest hanging fruit, just get outside in nature. And let dogs be dogs, let the dogs show you, how to get outside in nature again, because that's what's lacking a lot, is, since we're in Costa Rica, right, you see the dogs here, and coming from my world in aggression, you just don't see it, like, sure, you'll have little arguments here and there, you have little squabbles, maybe you have a fight sometimes, but it is nowhere near what's happening in the United States or other countries where we have much tighter restricted environments for dogs and people. Right? So you see a much different way of being, and happiness, and contentment, and just groundedness that you don't see. Now, and I'll just quickly mention, yes, there's some dogs and people that they're probably going to be maybe better not doing those things, or maybe they can't do those things. So you don't want to just single everybody out and say, okay, everybody's going to go outside. But the vast majority of dogs, people, just get out. Forget all the other gizmos and gadgets and fancy protocols and things like that. Just if you can, don't wear the stiff spot, get out in nature, go for a hike, off leash if you can, and long line if you can't, but get out there and that's going to pay off. And it's just shown worldwide. You look at the billion or plus dogs on the planet and how many are free roaming or not contained at home in any kind of environment, and then you measure up how much aggression those dogs have, that'll give you the answer. So, or behavior issues, even just aggression, behavior issues, and people. So, yeah.
And you can, you don't, I mean, going outside, being in nature, beautiful, but as you said, if somebody can't do that because they live in the city or they have other limitations, just letting the dog be a dog, playing with your dog, learning about your dog and having a relationship, all of that will help you out there. Because you can have a community, join a class, even if it's just online, do something with your dog that's dog-centric.
Right.
And exactly, and your heart will be happier, your dog will be happier as well. So,
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
really, that was really fun.
There were wonderful
Great
questions. And I think that's
Yeah, thank you for coming and watching.
Yeah.
now we push the button, right?
Push the right button
Okay.
and it disappears.
Pura Vida.